Okay, I think it's noon, so we can get started. Hello, everybody. Welcome, and thanks for joining us today for our January Lunch and Learn. We're all glad you could be here with us to kick off our first Lunch and Learn of the year. I hope everybody's staying warm. I'm not, despite all my layers of wool here in New Hampshire. But we are happy to welcome Ed Deal, who's going to be talking about urban Cooper's hawks in Seattle. So I'm looking forward to that. And I'm going to be facilitating things. I'm Julie Brown. I'm the Raptor Migration and Programs Director at the Hawk Migration Association. And I'll be facilitating things with Kat Lauer, who is our Communications and Engagement Coordinator. And for those of you who are new to HMA, we're a nonprofit that provides support to the Raptor Migration Monitoring Network across the Americas. We promote education and conservation of migratory raptors and archive migration count data in hawkcount.org. We're an active partner in the Raptor Population Index, which is a program that produces conservation assessments and population trend analyses derived from migration counts. And we have recently changed our name. We were the Hawk Migration Association of North America, and we dropped the North America. And now we are HMA. It's a more inclusive name that covers our whole entire monitoring network throughout the Americas. So just a couple things before we get started. We're going to be recording as usual. We're live streaming on our Facebook page. And you can view any of our Lunch and Learn programs on our Facebook page afterwards, or on our website. We have those recordings. You can scroll down to our What's New section or under Events and Tours. And we are now up to date on all our past Lunch and Learn recordings. So you can go in there if you missed Vic Berardi's talk on our Winter Raptor Survey program last month, or any others you may have missed. They're all in there. We've disabled the audio for everybody today. Looks like we have video. I might leave that on for now. But that's usually the best way to just reduce distraction. But even though you're muted, we love connecting with everybody. So we encourage you to use the chat window, ask questions, make comments. Kat is going to be monitoring the chat window, and she can read your questions to Ed at the end of the program. So let us know what you're thinking, or where you're joining from today. We'd love to hear that. And if you don't already receive our e-newsletter, that's a great way to sign up. So you can just put your email address into the chat, and I'll make sure you're getting our e-newsletters, which go out a couple times a month. I think I'll turn things over to Kat, who can introduce Ed.
Thanks, Julie. Hi, everybody. As Julie said, my name's Kat Lauer. I'm the Engagement and Communications Coordinator here, and it is my pleasure to introduce our speaker today. You would think someone born in Cooper Hospital and raised in Audubon, New Jersey would be a child prodigy birder. But Ed Deal's midlife conversion to birder involved taking Bud Anderson's Hawk ID class in 1991. He went on to volunteer on fall migration hawk banding projects in the Goshoot Mountains in Nevada, the Florida Keys, Cape May, New Jersey, and at Diamond Head, Chelan Ridge, and Antioch Ridge, I'm not sure I pronounced that right, sorry, in Washington. He volunteered on Falcon Research Group's entire 17-year study of nesting peregrine falcons in the San Juan Islands, and completed his 30th year monitoring and banding nesting peregrines in the Seattle area. For the last 13 years, he has worked with a group of volunteers studying the expanding urban population of Cooper's hawks in Seattle. He holds a federal master raptor banding permit and is a graduate of the Seattle Audubon Master Birder Program. We are so grateful to have you to talk with us today, and please begin when you're ready.
Okay. Thank you very much for the invitation. And this is mostly a happy tale. Cooper's hawks are thriving in the city, and there'll just be two short, depressing segments of this talk, but mostly they're doing really well. So, as you just heard, I had a lot of experience trapping fall migrants. I worked as a physical therapist to support my bird habit. Uh, and again, you heard most of this. I've had a master permit since 2011, and we've got 3 current banding studies of peregrines, Cooper's hawks, and now we're banding all rehabilitated raptors at a local wildlife center, including some color banding there as well. So Arthur Cleveland Bent had nothing nice to say about Cooper's hawks. Uh, I'll let you read that for a second here. Um, so they're all across North America now. Um, it they just got put into a new old genus Aster, along with American goshawk, and not with Sharpies. Um, what you may not know is that the Cooper's hawk was named by Charles Lucien Bonaparte, who was Napoleon's nephew. And Bonaparte had a estate in Bordentown, New Jersey, about 15 miles from where I grew up. And he shot one on his property and named it after William Cooper, who was a founder of the New York Academy of Sciences. And William Cooper's son was the Cooper of Cooper Union in New York City. Bonaparte named several other species, Swainson's hawk, um, Wilson's storm petrel after Alexander Wilson, and the genus Zenata for like mourning dove and white-winged dove. That's his wife's name. And that's the history you lose when you take proper names away from birds. So, on the left, hatch year male sharp-shinned hawk, 98 grams of fury. And on the right, a hatch year male American goshawk, 700 grams of meanness. And in between the two is a male hatch year Cooper's hawk. This is a Cape May bird. The eastern birds tend to be a little paler. And here's a western bird, a Seattle bird, female, vastly bigger than the male and much darker. So if you have read anything by Pete Dunne, you know he likes to stick his tongue firmly in his cheek. And this is one quote from the first edition of Hawks in Flight. So, Alan, this is your study. This is a wonderful study on identification in flight of accipiters. They had experienced observers and tested them with 988 accipiters, most of which were juveniles that were released out of sight, so there was no judging of size compared to the human releasing the bird. And what they found was veteran observers misidentified 23% of the male coops as female sharpshins. So if the rabid hawk watchers can't get them all right, what hope do the rest of us have? And if it wasn't hard enough already, every once in a while you'll get something like this. And some friends of mine caught this bird in 2008 in Western North Carolina, and it's a hybrid Cooper's hawk goshawk. And it really looks like a goshawk, except for that brown wash over the front. And that's an old bird with that deep red eye. So urban nesting Cooper's hawks, colonization of the city started in the 1980s and 1990s. There were probably a few isolated nests hidden away in urban areas. In Seattle, there was one in the mid 60s that was in a huge green belt. So the question always arises, have they always been here and you're just getting better at finding them, or is this actually a new colonization of urban areas? And the Milwaukee study really conclusively showed that it's a new colonization, because they, by good fortune, had some biologists driving structured survey routes looking for red-tailed hawk and great horned owl nests. And for the first 5 years of that survey, they had no Cooper's hawks. Then they found one Cooper's hawk nest, and then over the next decade or so, they got up to 40 plus nests as the birds colonized the city. Northern goshawk, or now American goshawk, this is a window hit stunned bird just outside the Seattle city limits, hatchy or female. I don't recommend holding a goshawk like this. The bird eventually cleared and flew off. The other accipiter that you will rarely see in the city is sharpshins. This is a nest that from 2013 that was just a few miles north of the Seattle city limits. They're rare in the city, and I've never seen a nest in the city because they're on the menu for a lot of other raptors, such as this from Edmonds, Washington, about 5 miles north of the Seattle city limits. This is an adult Cooper's hawk killing a juvenile sharpshin, complete with blood spurt. And also they're on the menu. Jamie Aker, a owl researcher on Bainbridge Island outside of Seattle, had a Sharpie wing under a barred owl nest. So our Cooper's hawk study was started way back in 2002 by Jack Bettisworth. And the origin myth of the study was the Woodland Park Zoo in Seattle had a raptor program, and they had several birds trained to falconry that they would fly as part of an education program. And one day they were flying their American kestrel, and a Cooper's hawk came out of the woods, nailed the kestrel, and kept going. So Jack got a permit to start putting bands on Cooper's hawks and found the first nest in the city in 2004. And from that one nest, we've gone to 65. So long-term urban studies, the ones with the line through have stopped. Bill Mannon retired a few years ago from University of Arizona, and Andy Stewart retired into Victoria. Andy is still actively mining his data pile and publishing along with Bob Rosenfield. I'll point out that there's nothing east of Milwaukee. So all you East Coast people, we could use a Cooper's hawk population study somewhere there. Typical urban juvenile perching on the back of a truck in a suburban street, and a hood ornament. So I'll take a quick run through the breeding season, typical milestones here. Courtship goes on for quite a number of weeks. They'll often build more than one nest. I've had them build up to 4, of which I found the wrong 3, and didn't find the 4th one till December when the trees dropped their leaves, and it's like, oops, missed that one. Both sexes will build the nest. If you want to find Cooper's hawks, you got to get out of bed, because when they're vocalizing in the spring, March and April for courtship, it's most frequently at dawn. We spend a lot of time surveying starting in March. So what we're looking for, here's a typical Cooper's hawk nest. on a central trunk of a big leaf maple about 15 or 20 feet down from the crown. This later that year fledged 5. Again, 10 or 15 feet down from the crown, central trunk of the madrona. Uh-oh. This must be a crow's nest. It's out on a low lateral branch of a cottonwood. No, it was a Cooper's hawk. And just to show it wasn't a fluke, they used it 2 years in a row. So this is what we're looking for in spring. Here's a pair, a female up here and a male here. And they're just silently getting used to perching near each other. And you try and pull up your lawn chair and wait for them to launch into a bout of courtship and nest building to show you where their nest is going to be. But to expand your vocabulary, woofed. You just look away for a split second and they're gone. And you can't find them anywhere. So females are 1.7 times larger than males. One of the largest differences in raptors. Females are dominant. They are monogamous, but they often cheat. So here's a pair, and you can tell male and female apart. Females are more coarsely barred than males, which is a terrible field mark. It's not very useful because if they're perched together, the female is much bigger. So one field mark, if you have an adult and you don't have a pair to compare sizes, this works pretty good. So on this female, right behind the eye, it's buffy brown. And on the male, it's gray. So gray cheeks are males. And this works almost all the time for adults. Nest building and egg laying mid-April through early June. The female will stay near the nest and stop hunting, usually. And there's a potential for mischief. And incubation 5 weeks. Male does all the hunting. Early failures may relay. We've had nests collapse in windstorms over the years, and sometimes the birds will relay, build a new nest, and other times that's it for the year. Here's courtesy of Bob Rosenfield. Here's the world record clutch of 8 Cooper's hawks. And he took blood samples, and they are all from the same pair. This isn't 2 clutches of 4 from 2 different females. So Bob did a marvelous piece of research that he published in 2015. Took blood samples from 140 youngsters, nestlings, and then trapped and took blood samples from the adults and tried to match them. And almost a third of the young were fathered by somebody else. So what's going on is the male off hunting and he stops at the neighboring territory and trades a little food for, leave some DNA behind. So I looked at this report. Brian Millsap did a study of pine plantations in Florida. And this is a lot of telemetry points. So there's not a lot of sightings of the actual birds or what they're doing, but it's telemetry points. So we've got colored circles that are male territories. And this is the movement of one female that's crosshatched just before egg laying. So she's visiting a number of different male territories. Ryan said at the time, the females assessing neighboring males and their territories, but we later found that they're more than assessing. Jack Bettisworth, with his group of volunteers before I took over leading the study, had a interesting observation of a banded female courting 2 neighboring males. And they had 15 days of observing copulations with both males. And she mated with the male at one site the day before she started incubating at the other site. And now in 2015, Martin Muller and I found another example of a female moving back and forth between two male territories. And then this past season, we had the third. But if you look at Bob Rosenfield's work, almost a third of the birds had an extra pair parent. So this is probably going on much more often than we observe, even in our fairly intensive surveys. Nobody's ever proven that the male is off spreading DNA beyond his own territory. So right before they lay, they go into what's called egg lethargy, and it seems like they're hypnotized. They're in a trance perched on the edge of the nest. And that lets you know that egg laying is getting really close. And incubation, you find that tail, what we call the telltale tail hanging over the side. Thank God the Cooper's hawks have long tails, so you can tell that it's occupied. They have an asynchronous hatch. One thing that amazes me is they go from an egg to an adult in 5 weeks. It's a tremendous energy demand. There was an early study done by Pat Kennedy in the 1980s here in Washington State, Lopez Island. And during the peak growth period, like week 3, week 4 of the juveniles, nestlings, she averaged 9.1 prey deliveries per day. And if you figure that out, if he's 25% successful, that's a lot of hunts just to get 9 prey deliveries. And the asynchronous hatch results in a spread of sizes of the nestlings. Here's a great photo of 3 different age chicks in the same nest. And again, there's 4 chicks here, but this huge oldest chick here, and then the other 3 are about the same size. As the chicks get bigger, the female rises higher while she's brooding them, so she's easier to see. And after about 10 days to 2 weeks, they don't need to be brooded anymore, and she'll perch with them. But shortly afterwards, they get so obnoxious, pestering her for food, that she perches just out of sight and hides from them, but still stands guard. And again, here's 4 in a conifer nest. They'll start branching at 4 weeks. They'll fledge at 5 weeks. And something clicks in their neurological development at about 2 to 3 weeks post-fledge, and they start chasing everything. And inappropriate things like great blue herons, and they're just having fun. They're chasing each other. They're playing tag with crows. They're great fun to watch. And when they get to be 2 to 3 weeks old, that's when we show up with our traps and try and band them. So here's a teenage hoodlum gang on the prowl. They're very curious. They're all well fed. And so they've got lots of time to explore. And they're just a joy to watch. And here's your velociraptor on the right there. So one of them will fly across the street and land on the roof of a house, and 3 more will follow it very quickly, and then they'll all run along like little velociraptors along the roof line. Juvenile dispersal, University of Arizona study of 40 with VHF transmitters. They don't disperse very far. They disperse about 6 weeks post-fledge. Don't you wish your kids dispersed that fast? And females a little further than males, but not very far. Siblings dispersed independently in that study, and a third are dead within 6 months. So here's my favorite Cooper's hawk photo. This is August from a few years ago. It's the only day in August that it rained. This guy is exactly 6 weeks post-fledge, and he's 15 miles away from his nest in a backyard, and he's going somewhere with purpose. He may not know where he's going, but he's got a purpose. So the other thing that we've learned in recent years is there are a lot of 1-year-old females that will nest. So here's a typical pair of an adult male and a 1-year-old female still in juvenile plumage. Brian Millsap did a great study of putting VHF transmitters on 80 juvenile females. 60% died in the first year, and if they lived to be 1 year old, 100% of them nested. That's not quite true. One of them was injured and in a rehab facility, and it didn't nest. So the thinking before this had been that both sexes are floaters during their first year, and they don't nest till they're 2 years old. And females nesting in juvenile plumage is quite uncommon, but if they live to be 1 year old, they're nesting. Contrast that to 1-year-old males. Bob Rosenfield had a huge data set of 732 pairs. 13 of the males were 1 year old. So we've got a little more frequent 1-year-old male nesting in Seattle, 5%, but they got to have the right stuff to pull that off at 1 year. They need to learn how to claim a territory, how to hold a territory, and how to hunt, have enough hunting locations to be able to feed 4 or 5 kids, their mate, and themselves. So for most male Cooper hawks, that's 2 years to acquire that skill. What are they eating? Mostly things that you want eaten. Starlings, house sparrows, pigeons, rats, rabbits. Andy Stewart's group up in Victoria, BC, did a nice study on several nests, and they said 50% of the prey base was starlings and house sparrows. If you throw in robins, it's 85%. The other 15% is everything. So the birds love these industrial feeder operations, like this is in Seattle. But Tim Roth kind of upset the apple cart with this study where he radio tracked wintering accipiters, both Sharpies and Coops. He said there's no systematic use of bird feeders. And I love this quote: feeders are locations where humans are more likely to observe hawk attacks, not where hawks are most likely to hunt. I still would like to duplicate this study at some point, because they sure seem to know where every feeder is in their territory. So here's one of my favorite males who's no longer with us. It's a 280-gram male taking down a pigeon. It probably weighs 300 grams or more. And he's glaring at the photographer because he knows he can't pick up this pigeon and fly away. So dietary flexibility, different parts of the country, they have different preferred foods. The Southwest, the Albuquerque and Tucson, there's all those dove species that we don't have further north. Chipmunks in Wisconsin. Pat Kennedy's study on Lopez Island, they were eating a lot of California quail. Here in Seattle, it's a mix of birds, rats, and rabbits. There's typical Seattle rabbit and a Drake wood duck. And we just got a great photo in, which I don't have here, of a female coop killing a Drake northern shoveler. So here's our first depressing part of the talk, the downside of urban life. window hits is the biggest killer of Cooper's hawks. Um, Frounce, we haven't had much problem with trichomonas, unlike Tucson, which had a real problem. Uh, Anticoagulant, rat poison kills more than rats. And there's a number of legacy, what they call forever chemicals, uh, avian influenza, and Cooper's hawks are not not an apex predator. They're on the menu for the big owls, and if they don't pay attention, egg thieves can get their eggs. Um, in the literature, there are two reports of barred owls killing Cooper's hawks, and I just had a reliable report from November of here in Seattle, a barred owl eating a Cooper's hawk. And there's one report in the literature of a Cooper's hawk killing a barred owl. So John Elliott up in Vancouver, BC, great toxicologist. He looked at 21 Cooper's hawks in the Vancouver, BC area, and one of them had DDE levels above that, which was thought to cause eggshell thinning 40 years after DDT was banned. Window hits. Here's a dramatic picture of a juvenile male Cooper's hawk who was chasing a pigeon, and they both hit a window and they're both dead on the spot. Here's a dust print from a Tacoma peregrine fledgling. Amazingly, this bird lived, but was deemed unreleasable and was trained to falconry and is served as an education bird at the High Desert Museum in Bend, Oregon. So she could fly for education programs, but wasn't good enough to go hunt and be totally independent. If you want to learn more about window hits, this is a great place to start. The other big problem for Cooper's hawks and other urban raptors is the anticoagulant rodenticides. Warfarin was the first one. Here's your trivia for today. Warfarin is Wisconsin Alumni Research Fund. It's the second generation super warfarins that are the problem. Brodifacoum, bromadiolone. They're highly lethal. They're highly persistent with long half-lives, and raptors can bioaccumulate a fatal dose from several non-fatal doses. Here's your best introductory reference, this textbook. And there are a lot of birds reported contaminated with rat poison. So here's a Seattle juvenile eating a rat. So nobody has looked at that in the Northwest. So we foolishly formed a 501c3 and filed a lot of grant proposals and got lots of rejections. And then we won one nice grant from the Patagonia company, and several other grants came in, and we were able to complete our study. We haven't published it yet, but that's coming. So we looked at 280 dead hawks, falcons, eagles, and owls. About 85% of them tested positive for exposure to rat poison. We also tested 59 birds for the neurotoxin, which would be a substitute for the anticoagulant, bromethylene. We only had one positive, and at $150 a test, we thought that was enough. The winner of the rat poison sweepstakes was a dead on arrival barred owl from a city park in Seattle. Had 4 different anticoagulants on board plus bromethylene. A lot of our birds just have these very trace, 7 parts per billion. That's trivial. That's not going to affect the bird. But this 2000 parts per billion. That's what killed this bird. So there's a debate of who's exposed versus who's poisoned. What's a safe level? We don't know. 55 of the 62 Cooper's hawks we tested were positive. So here are two old friends. This is Patty Leshy on the left. She's the president of Urban Raptor Conservancy, one of our co-founders. And on the right is the dear departed purple left 1/3. He was born on the University of Washington campus and took over the territory after his parents died from window hits. He hit a window off campus and was taken to pause with an open wing fracture and had to be euthanized. He had 4 different rat poisons on board, none of which is particularly a high level, although that 102 might have made him bleed a little more in response to his open wing fracture. But most of the birds we tested died of something else. So I drew a 500-meter circle around his nest, and I counted 294 of those black bait boxes. And that's without trespassing. So there were more. We hope to publish our results later this year, and we got grants from Patagonia and several other organizations and a lot of individual donors, to which we say thank you. Okay, let's look at the study results. So we had 3 deceptively simple goals. Find all the nests in the city to measure density, count the number of fledglings to measure productivity, and put color VID bands on as many as possible and track them. So last year, we had 65 nest building pairs, and the city of Seattle is almost 84 square miles. Minimum density is 1 pair for every 1.29 square miles. But we had 1 year, we had 2 nests that were 330 meters apart. And there's some parts of the city that I don't search. They're either inaccessible or they're unsafe. Homeless camps, for example, in green belts. So where do they nest? They love the Seattle park system. And then private residencies, they love cemeteries and college campuses. So they love the Olmsted brothers did several plans for the city of Seattle in 1903 and then several more plans after 1903. And their goal was to have a city park within 1-mile walk of every resident. So almost all of these red circles on the map are Olmsted parks. And here's a more modern mapping technique that shows you the distribution of the nests. And there's the southern half of the city. So where do they nest? A range of habitats. We've got some second and third growth Douglas fir, and there's a nest way up in that Doug fir there. They love the mosaic lawn and forests of city parks. Here's a nest in a big leaf maple that fledged 5. And in some parts of Seattle, there's some large Doug firs, and they'll be in them. So there's another big leaf maple nest behind a house in a private neighborhood. So what trees do they like? Anything that's available. Big leaf maple is our most common tree, and it's our most common tree used by Cooper's hawks. Second is Doug fir. Third, white pine. Fourth, madrona, and fifth, alder. That comprises 73% of our trees. But then there's basically every other species of tree that they could possibly be in, we've had them in. The only things that are interesting, well, Let me phrase that a different way. White pine is used out of proportion to its abundance. So they like white pines. And Western red cedar are used much less than you would expect based on its abundance in the Northwest. My explanation of why they don't use red cedars is that wherever there's a Western red cedar, there's 10 Doug firs around it. Sorry. So about 80% of our territories are reoccupied the next year. About 2/3 of them will build a new nest every year, and 1/3 of the coops will reuse the previous year's nest. They'll occasionally reuse older nests, such as this Victory Heights nest that they used. It's almost like golden eagles, where they have two nests, and because of the bugs, they'll switch back and forth on opposite years. Uh, so one banded female used the same nest for 9 years and almost 10. She was courting and nest building in the 10th year in March, and she was hit by a car and killed. So productivity, 65 nest building pairs, 9 of them failed to progress to incubation. 3 of them failed during incubation. 2 of them failed after hatching before fledging. We still had 183 fledglings, and that worked out to 3.57 fledglings per successful pair. So what's been going on since 2012 is increases almost every year, but these last couple of years, we might be getting somewhere close to carrying capacity. But there's still a lot of territories that I look at and say, why aren't there Cooper's hawks here? This is perfect. So your limitation may be prey-based, but we don't know. I have to stick with this study a couple more years and see how dense the population really gets. So the question I'm often asked is the population really increasing, or are you just getting better at finding them? And I just say yes. So banding, we got a permit to put color bands on Cooper's hawks, and we use balsa tree traps. And these kids, this little juvenile male, he's just learning how to hunt, and he's just baffled because you guys are supposed to fly off, and I'm supposed to chase you. And these we use, in this case, society finches, which are totally indifferent to Cooper's hawks. Whereas house sparrows, once they see a Cooper's hawk, they freeze. So these society finches are just happily grazing, and this guy's trying to decide what to do. And sometimes he'll jump on the trap, and sometimes he'll flee. Other times you get lucky and you get two at once. These juveniles both came in hard. You put a towel over one to keep it quiet and get the other one into a can, and then come back for the second one. So the ones we catch, males get a purple band on the left leg. So this guy would be purple left 0/8. And females get an orange band on the right leg. This would be orange right 6/R. And they're always happy to fly off after they've been banded. This is Martin Muller, my partner in this study. So with our color banding project, we've banded 621 Cooper's hawks in the city since 2012. We've got over 900 sightings on 282 different birds. We got a lot of mortality, mostly window hits and car hits when we can get a reason for death. We've got over 800 live sightings where somebody reads the VID band or photographs it. So we've got an excellent return rate of almost 45%. So where are these band sightings? mostly in the city of Seattle. And the city of Seattle, for those of you who don't know, is the county seat for King County. So there's almost 840 sightings of our 906 are in King County. So we have had 3 sightings south of Tacoma, and they were great sightings. One's Grants Pass, Oregon. That was a northbound male in spring. One in Oakland, California, and one in Nye County, Nevada, about 100 miles north of Vegas. So the COVID pandemic was very good to the Cooper's Hawk study. Uh, Washington State was one of the earliest affected by COVID, and mid-March of 2020, they shut down everything. So we had been tooling along with this level of band sightings, and all of a sudden it doubled in 2020, and then it doubled again in 2021, 2022. And what's happening is people are working from home instead of going into the office. And instead of looking at their laptop, they're watching their bird feeders. And they'll send us some great photos. It's amazing how many good cameras and zoom lenses are out there because we could send some wonderful photos. So conclusions from our banding program, most of our urban birds do not migrate. So we have a lot of sightings in the winter months, which we shouldn't have if they're all migratory. There's have a strong nest site fidelity, a strong wintering site fidelity, and short natal dispersal distances. So here's a typical photo sent to me. I banded this bird about 8 hours earlier, a couple hundred yards away. This bird turned up at a water feature, and you can see orange right 6 over Z, and that's just a wild bird being photographed. And I was really excited to get this sent to me. This is the same bird 2 years later, about 80 miles north of Seattle in Anacortes. And I'm thinking, wow, that's a great dispersal. And here's a great photo, again, of a wild bird with a zoom lens. And what the truth was is they have a very enlightened bird strike avoidance program at SeaTac Airport. And Bud Anderson would trap the birds off the runways and take them up to the Skagit Flats and release them up there. So this bird got a free ride up to within a few miles of Anacortes, where it was photographed 2 years later. If you want to have Cooper's Hawks in your yard, they love water features, bird baths. They'll bathe every day if they have the opportunity. So some research questions that we're working on. What's going to be the ultimate nesting density? How do Cooper's Hawks and barred owls partition the habitat? We've had 2 pairs of Cooper's Hawks get evicted from their nesting territory by barred owls and have their nest taken over by barred owls. They definitely don't like each other. How will climate change affect urban raptors? Well, we got a preview of that. Here's the second depressing part. So in June of 2021, we had a unprecedented heat wave of over 100 degrees for 3 straight days. These are 3 dead Cooper's Hawk chicks that got so hot in the nest they jumped. And you can see by their lack of wings what the outcome was. So our local wildlife center had a full house. They were pulling their hair out. We had a dozen Coops, 9 bald eagles, all jumpers. We had to hold the Cooper's Hawks until they fledged and then go out and find the parents and siblings to release them. So yeah, we had 102, 104, 108 degrees in 3 consecutive days. Portland was worse. Portland had a peak of 116 degrees. their wildlife center got 110 Cooper's hawk chicks in 4 days. And they managed to get about 2/3 of those birds rehydrated and back out. So one of our jumpers was Miss Orange D4. Uh, she was brought in from Marble Mount, Washington, and we were unable to relocate her parents to release her. And so we fostered her into a nest in Northeast Seattle that had just, the parents were just feeding 2 kids. So she successfully nested the following year and again last year, and has fledged 4 each year. And there she is. Also, here's a funny story. Uh, this is again Patty Leshy, uh, our president. So a juvenile female in her neighborhood went down a chimney, and the residents heard food begging coming out of their chimney and fireplace. Patty came over and pulled the bird out through the flue, banded and released it, named her Ashley, and she was seen alive and well a few months later. So if you want to learn more about Cooper's hawks, a good place to start is Bob Rosenfield's book. Another good source on Cooper's hawks, 3 of the principal researchers on Cooper's hawks wrote the chapter on Cooper's hawks in this book. I did not. I am one of the co-authors on the peregrine study, peregrine chapter in this book. Pick your fieldwork site wisely. You can definitely stay caffeinated in Seattle. And in 2018, I did a big year of going to all 56 of the brew pubs in Seattle. So I'd go 6 or 8 hours in the field and then go work on my field notes with a pint. So here's our pair of Cooper's hawks again. And this pair was together for several years, and just like humans, they get along well, but some days they're just not on the same page. So this is a short video prepared by my friend Martin Muller. So if you're running short on clothespins, Cooper's hawks can help you out if you put out a bird feeder. So I want to thank these are my volunteers and the people who donated photographs and time for questions. And also let you know that each year we produce 3 annual reports summarizing our work, one on Cooper's hawks, one on peregrines, and one on everything else. So all the past issues are available on our website right there. And with that, let's take some questions, and I'll also put up the notice on the next talk here. There.
Thank you so much, Ed. That was wonderful. We have a few questions in the chat. There are a few that have already kind of been answered or answered in the chat, but Carl wants to know how many field people are needed to locate 65 nests each year.
Last year, I went through and looked through my email selection, and there were 24 people.
Wow.
And some of them just check one nest in their backyard or their neighborhood, and other rabid people go to 10 or 15. Had a couple of really strong volunteers in the West Seattle part of Seattle, and they went to all 17 nests there. But yeah,
Uh,
the hardest thing is getting enough people, and we're still missing nests. These numbers are minimums.
wow. So Trudy would like to know, as the population has increased, did the locations spread out or did they fill in increasing density? Um,
The latter, they filled in.
cool. And then Lori wants to know, are there other diurnal raptors in the same neighborhoods or do they interact or exclude?
There are a number of nesting merlins in the city, and they well, as you all know, merlins have a real bad attitude. And I've seen a couple of female merlins just go way out, like 2 or 3 blocks out of their way, just to smack the neighboring Cooper's hawk at their nest. So they're there. There's a few red tail nests in the city, and probably 20 bald eagle nests. And we did lose a Cooper's hawk to a bald eagle. We lost one of our banded Cooper's hawks to a peregrine. And that's all I can think of right now. I had red tails, a pair of red tails evict some Cooper's hawks from the nest they were building and say, that looks great, I'll take it. Um, but the Cooper's hawks moved a half a mile away and re-nested.
Wow. Yeah. Christina would like to know, is there any evidence of attacks on American kestrels? She says that one hypothesis is that Coopers may assist American kestrel decline. Do you have any information about that?
Well, other than our origin myth of the kestrel being taken by a Cooper's hawk, no. Um, but yeah, Cooper's hawks have also been implicated in the decline in Sharpies as well.
Wow. That's all I have in the chat right now. I think I'm going to say thank you so much again, Ed. This was just a wonderful talk. I learned so much. I actually had Cooper's hawks nesting in my backyard this last summer, and so this has given me so much valuable information, and I really hope they come back next year. I'm going to pass it over to Julie, who's going to do a little send off. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thanks for your interest.
Great, and I will just add one more question to you, Ed, that just came in. You mentioned banding juveniles in late summer. Do you band adults in winter, early spring?
Yes. So
Okay.
I have 4 sub-permittees on my master permit, and they're all out looking for coops now, adults or second year birds. And we shut down banding March 1st, and then I'm sorry, April 1st. We shut down banding until July 1st. So we leave them alone during the nesting season. But yeah, the juveniles are easy to catch, but they're getting warier. It was really hard catching a lot of juveniles this year. And I don't know what that is, or else they're just so well fed they won't come in on a trap. But yeah, we get many more juveniles than we get adults.
Okay, thanks. There was one question early on about, could you show that that slide again? It was a book that you recommended for, I think, rodenticide, learning more about rodenticide.
Oh yeah. Oh, there it went. There.
Thank you. Okay.
Great book.
Okay.
So yeah, John Elliott, Barnett Ratner, they've published a lot of work on rat poison and other toxins. The other person, Maureen Murray at Tufts, has done a great job testing for rat poison in the Massachusetts area.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much, Ed. What a wonderful monitoring program you have. It's really impressive, and I'm glad to see that Cooper Talks are thriving and seemingly very adaptable in your area. That's good to hear. It's not always good news like that for raptors. And thanks for all you do. You're getting some great feedback and great comments in the chat. People really, really enjoyed your talk. So thank you.
Well, thank you very much. Thanks for your attention, everyone.
Yeah.
Appreciate it. I always like a chance to preach the Coop gospel.
Thank you.
You're quite welcome.
If you want to go back to the very last slide, Ed, I'll talk about next month, which you pulled up there briefly. Our next February Lunch and Learn is happening just in a couple weeks, February 5th, and we're going to be hearing from Clay Sutton. So if you missed our 50th anniversary conference in Duluth this past November, Clay was our plenary speaker there, and he is going to be sharing that same talk with the wider hawk watching community, reflections on hawk watching and all the changes over the past 50 years. Really fabulous talk, so don't miss it. You can register on Facebook. You can go to our website and register there. I'll also be sending an e-newsletter out with registration information. I mentioned that we are changing our name, kind of still in the process of doing that everywhere. So bear with us over the next few months as we transition all of our web content and all of our everything labeled Humana that's out there in the world. We do have some great new merchandise. We have sweatshirts and t-shirts, which I don't want to think about in this cold right now. But Raptor greeting cards, decals, and things. So if you want to check out any of that, you can still use our humana.org website. We are transitioning to www.hawkmigration.org. Both of them are working right now. So thank you to everybody for joining us today and supporting Lunch and Learn and the work we do for raptors and the hawk watching community. We encourage you to support HMA with a membership, which is a great way to support raptors. You can join our kettle and become a member online at our website. So I hope everybody has a great day, and I hope we see everybody again next month.